Paris is quite an uncommon and scarce plant to find nationally. It is also scarce in the Yorkshire Dales, but the good news is that it does prefer calcareous or lime-rich soils, which you get in abundance in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. And so this is why it is worth learning how to identify and looking out for this really unusual little herb. It's called the herb of equality, and that is because it is considered to be equal and harmonious in all parts, so it has often been used as a flower and a symbol for weddings. It flowers during the months of May to June, and it prefers woodlands that are moist but well drained and on lime-rich soils, which is why you find it in the Yorkshire Dales. And you'll often see it nestled underneath a tree in a shady area alongside your primroses and your bluebells. Herb Paris might be hard to find, but it is relatively easy to identify once you get your eye in. So it's definitely worth making the effort to try and find this beautiful little flower. It has a hairless, erect stem that grows to about 40 centimeters high and ends in a parasol style whorl of beautiful distinctive leaves that form just underneath the flower head. This is such a beautiful flower that I think the leaves themselves are pretty enough to be petals. But these are the petals here, these tiny little 4 wispy things here, which are just above your sepals that are curving down underneath. Early in the season, before this plant has opened and flowered, you'll see these forming a little egg-shaped bulb protecting the flower head. And you can see here, this is a lovely example of what's referred to as a superior ovary, where the ovary is sitting on top of the rest of your flower. And then you can see the male parts of the plant here with their lovely yellow pollen on the edges of their anthers. So look at some pictures of herb Paris, get your eye in for it, and then you'll be randomly walking around a woodland in the Yorkshire Dales sometime and it'll catch your eye, probably underneath a tree in a lovely shaded part of your woodland, and you'll think, oh my gosh, yes, that's herb Paris. The primrose is one of Britain's most beloved early spring flowers, and in fact the name primrose is from the Latin prima rosa, which means first rose, which just goes to show how long this flower has been adored by people. But the name is not to be taken literally, because it isn't in fact a member of the rose family, but instead the primula family, alongside your cowslips and your false oxlips. It's such a beautiful little flower, and you'll find it on pretty much everywhere, from riverbanks, roadsides, hedgerows, grasslands and woodlands between the months of late February to early June. And it's quite an easy one to identify. It is a lovely, dainty little flower. It has 5 lovely, delicate little petals, each of which are notched, and in the middle of the corolla it has a splash of darker yellow, which is just gorgeous, and has a deep calyx tube behind. The leaves form in a basal rosette, which means they are at the base of the stem, and they are really wrinkled and almost cabbage-like and hairy underneath. You have a single stem to each flower, which is also hairy. Whilst I was out enjoying another lovely walk in the sunny, glorious Yorkshire Dales, I've come across a perfect example to explain to you how you know the difference between your primroses, your cowslips and your false oxlip, which are 3 flowers in the Dales that are commonly mistaken for each other. So let's have a look. So here we have the primrose, unmistakable to many. This primrose is often mistaken for false oxlip. So let's have a look at the really important distinguishing factor between them. So if we have a look at the stem here, you'll notice that there's a stem coming up, and on the end of that stem there's only one flower. So one flower to a stem, and you know that you have a primrose. Now let's have a look over here though. So I noticed these false oxlips and they caught my eye because in a field that was full of lovely light yellow, these were a slightly darker yellow. If we come up, you'll notice that the leaves are very primrose-like. They could easily be mistaken for a primrose. You can see you've got your 5 petals and they're each notched. And you've got your calyx tube behind it, just like your primrose. And they've got very similar leaves. You can see they're cabbage-like, hairy on the other side. But the really distinguishing factor for here is that if you look at your stem and follow it up, there are loads of flowers to one stem. So this is called an umbel. So this is telling me that this is definitely not your normal primrose. So this is in fact a false oxlip. And so how does a flower like this form? Well, this is a cross-pollination between your cowslip and your primrose. And of course, speaking of cowslips, here's one we prepared earlier. And it's not surprising that it's right beside. So sometimes people mistake your false oxlips for either a primrose, or actually they think, oh, there's an umbel, there's loads of flowers onto one stem, so that must mean that it's a cowslip, but it isn't. And so how would we differentiate the cowslip? Well, if you compare the two, which you can here, and it's not uncommon to have them beside each other because it's the cross-pollination that gives rise. They're a much smaller little flower, okay? And they tend to be a lot more closed up than your false oxlip or your primrose. They're a deeper colour of yellow, and on the inside, instead of having a splash of continuous colour, they look like the darker orangey yellow is in like streaks or little speckles, which you can see here. And the calyx tube looks way more obvious on a cowslip than in your false oxlips, because the flowers of your cowslip tend to droop down, like you can see here, typically actually to one side. And then because the relative size of the flower is so much smaller, it makes your calyx tube a way more prominent. So there you have it. You've got your cowslips, you've got your false oxlips, which you can tell because again you have an umbel, but you've got your primrose style flower head on the top, and your primroses, which you can see over here as a lovely lighter colour. So now hopefully you'll be able to tell the difference between the three of them when you're out for your next wildflower walk. So primroses and cowslips on their own are quite easy to identify, but you get lots of fabulous hybrids and crosses between the two flowers, and these can get a little bit more complex. Now, a fabulous example of this is right down here beneath me. So here we have a hybrid. So the first thing that we're noticing here is that we've got these primrose-like flowers. However, they're darker coloured, not like what we normally see in the wild, which is our lovely pale lemon yellow. And so these no doubt will be a hybrid with a garden variety of primrose. But the other thing that makes it very oxlip-like is the fact that it's an umbel. A number of flowers to one stalk. So this is more like your oxlip and your cowslip arrangement, and then your petals are very much like your primrose. So this no doubt will be a hybrid between the two. Early purple orchid, as the name suggests, is one of the first of our native orchids to flower. and you can see them as early as March and right through until the start of June. It is a member of the Orchid family and the Orchis genera, and you'll find it forming sometimes carpets of orchid in woodlands, scrublands, grasslands, in limestone areas. With a lot of flowers, if you look at the colour and shape of the petals on its flower head, you're going to be pretty sure to be able to identify it. But orchids are not that way at all. They're a lot more complicated and complex to identify, and that is something that puts an awful lot of people off. But actually, you don't need a huge amount of information in order to be able to decipher which orchid is which, and that little bit of effort is hugely rewarding. And I have a lovely example here. So we've got two early purple orchids. When you look at them, they actually don't look quite the same. So the one thing that I would say to anybody when identifying orchids is forget the idea of looking at the colour, because the colours can vary quite a lot. This is two early purple orchids. One is a really pinky and actually quite white on the lower lip, and then the other one is a darker purple. Some can be a really deep dark purple, and a few can be even just plain white, but they are all the same orchid, and it's actually quite easy to see that they are. And we'll start by looking at the leaves. So the leaves on both of these orchids are forming a basal rosette, meaning that they are at the base of the flower and they are around the bottom in a rosette. They both have oblong leaves. They may or may not have purple blotches. So if we have a look at this one on the left, you'll see that there is no blotches or spots on the leaves. However, the one on the right does. Early purple orchids do have spots on their leaves, but they don't always have spots. But one thing that you can use to tell the difference between the spots of different types of orchids is how they are aligned. So these purple blotches are aligned upright along the leaves. Now we can have a look at the flowers. They're arranged in a raceme, which is what you're expecting, between 5 and 15 centimetres height. So now let's have a closer look, and we'll start with this one on the left. So the lateral tepals are both erect, so they can be anything between 90 degrees, which is out to the side, or standing right up, which you can see here. So these are standing right up, and this is one of the things you're looking out for, is the angle of your lateral tepals. So they're upright, which is what we're expecting. The rear sepal, which is here, and the two top petals, which you can see on either side, are forming a hood. So that's correct. So they are doing that. Okay, that's great. And then the labellum, which is the lip at the bottom, is divided into 3 notches. So you have 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. And you don't need to just look at one, you can look at a few of them to make sure that you're right. So that is divided into 3 shallow lobes. Okay, so the lateral or the side lobes of the lip can be crenulate, so they can be ever so slightly notched and wavy on the edges, which you can see they are. And then those side lobes are shorter than the middle lobe, and that is the case. And the middle lobe has a notch in the middle, so it's divided in 2. So you can see here, and the lower lip really is the most crucial bit to be able to look at. So you've got a lip, you've got 1, 2, 3 lobes, the middle one is subdivided again, and the middle one is slightly longer than the side. So that is what you can see here. And you've got a spur which points upwards. So all of that is telling me with great certainty that we're looking at early purple orchid. So let's have a look at the one next to it, which is a much deeper colour and has splotches and dots on the leaves that the other one doesn't. But are they the same orchid? You've got a lower lip which is divided into 3 lobes, and the one in the middle is subdivided again, and that is longer than the 2 side lobes. So there we have it. We're pretty sure that this must also be early purple orchid. You've got a spur that is pointing upwards, the same as the other one. You have lateral tepals here that are pointing upwards, and we have a sepal and 2 petals forming a hood over your labellum. So this is also early purple orchid. And when you start to look at all of your different orchids, you'll notice that the lips are really distinct and different from each other. Sometimes that lower lip can just be 1 lobe, sometimes it's curled up, sometimes it can have loads of other smaller lobes, and your lateral tepals can point upwards, to the side and downwards. And all of those angles and all that information tells you and gives you clues as to what orchid it is. So hopefully now you'll be able to identify with confidence your early purple orchid. If you see swathes of purple or blue in woodlands during the months of April or May, it's going to be one of 2 flowers, the bluebell or the common dog violet, which is such a beautiful little flower that is a member of the viola family. So it's related to your pansies and looks quite like one. Now it is the most common of the violets, but it is actually one of the few violets that has no smell. And that's why it's got this really strange name, dog violet. It's got nothing to do with the animal dog, dog meaning that it has no scent, which is quite unusual for this particular species. And if we have a closer look, it's really delicate and dainty. The stem itself comes up and curves down to the flower. It's got 5 little petals that are lightly overlapping, and the bottom petal forms a lip that comes into a little spur on the inside, which is really fabulously decorated. And then your leaves are pretty. They are heart-shaped and they kind of furl just at the edges, which is really nice as well to see. So they catch a little bit of water in the rain. So another similar species, you can see a white version of these violets, and that is the sweet violet, which smells lovely and sweet and was used as a perfume during ancient Greek times.